The sound of gunfire crackled in the distance as Emmett Donovan stood on his porch, squinting against the harsh Montana sun of 1875. His weathered hand instinctively reached for the rifle propped against the wooden railing, a habit born from years of protecting what was his 4 children who weren't his by blood, but entirely his by heart. "Pa," 8-year-old Mary called from inside the modest ranch house. "Tommy's gone and put a frog in Sarah's dress again." Emmett sighed deeply, his broad shoulders dropping slightly under the weight of responsibilities he'd never planned to shoulder alone. At 34, the lines around his eyes told of hardships weathered and joys discovered in unexpected places. Turning away from the distant hills where the gunfire had faded, he stepped back into the chaos that was his daily life. "Thomas James, you get in here right now," he called, his deep voice firm but not unkind. The gangly 10-year-old appeared from behind the kitchen door, dirt smudged across his freckled face, a mischievous glint in his eyes that reminded Emmett painfully of the boy's father. "She said frogs were cute, Pa." "I was just helping her get a closer look," Tommy explained, attempting to look innocent and failing spectacularly. Sarah, 6 years old with blonde braids and a tear-streaked face, clutched her damp dress. "It was cold and slimy and jumped at my face." Emmett knelt down, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket to wipe Sarah's tears. "Tommy, apologize to your sister." "Sorry, Sarah," Tommy mumbled, scuffing his boot against the wooden floor. 12-year-old Henry, the oldest of the brood, leaned against the doorway with an expression too serious for his young face. "Pa, Mr. Henderson rode by earlier. Said the mail coach is coming through today. You said to remind you." Emmett nodded, suddenly feeling the flutter of nervousness he'd been fighting for weeks. "Thank you, Henry. Today was the day." After months of correspondence, Penelope Abbott would be arriving on that very coach. The Boston woman who had answered his advertisement for a mail-order bride, who had agreed to marry a man she'd never met and become mother to 4 orphaned children who desperately needed one. "Everyone get cleaned up," Emmett instructed, glancing at the old clock on the mantel. "We're heading into town in an hour." As the children scattered to wash and change, Emmett retreated to his small bedroom. From beneath his bed, he pulled out a wooden box containing the letters he'd exchanged with Penelope over the past 6 months. Her neat handwriting filled pages with thoughtful questions about the children, about life in the Montana Territory, about him. He'd been honest, perhaps too honest, about the challenges of ranching in this untamed land, about raising 4 children whose parents had been his dearest friends, taken by a smallpox outbreak 2 years prior. Emmett changed into his least worn shirt, attempted to tame his sandy brown hair, and trimmed his beard. The face that stared back at him from the small mirror seemed inadequate for the task ahead, convincing a refined Eastern woman she hadn't made a terrible mistake. "Pa, are you primping?" Henry asked from the doorway, a knowing smile on his young face. Emmett felt his ears grow warm. "Just making myself presentable, as you all should be doing." "Is she pretty?" Mary asked, appearing beside her brother. "In the picture, she looked pretty." "She is," Emmett confirmed, remembering the photograph Penelope had sent a serious-faced woman with intelligent eyes and a mouth that hinted at a smile rarely given but worth earning. Within the hour, all 5 Donovans were loaded into the wagon, heading toward the growing settlement of Pinecrest. The children chattered excitedly, asking questions about their soon-to-be mother that Emmett couldn't answer. Would she know how to bake pie? Could she sew dolls? Did she like fishing? Would she read stories at night? She's a schoolteacher from Boston, Emmett reminded them for the dozenth time. She's educated and kind. Beyond that, we'll all be learning together. The main street of Pinecrest bustled with the usual afternoon activity, horses tied outside the saloon, miners and ranchers conducting business, women shopping at the general store. Emmett guided the wagon to a stop near the stage depot, his heart pounding uncomfortably in his chest. "The coach is late," said Abigail Henderson, the depot manager's wife, as Emmett approached with the children trailing behind him. "Probably delayed by that commotion out past Wilson's Creek." Heard there was some trouble with road agents. Emmett felt a cold grip of fear. Road agents, was anyone hurt? Don't know yet, Abigail said with a sympathetic smile. But don't you worry yourself. Marshal Franklin rode out with some men as soon as word came. The children had grown quiet, sensing their father's concern. Emmett forced a smile. Well then, seems we have time for some peppermint sticks at the general store. The distraction worked momentarily, but as 1 hour stretched into 2, Emmett's worry deepened. He paced the platform while the children played a half-hearted game of tag nearby. Pa, Henry appeared at his side. What if something happened to her? Emmett placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Then we'll handle it, same as we've handled everything else. The distant sound of hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. Not the stagecoach, but Marshal Franklin riding hard into town, dust billowing behind him. Emmett's heart sank. Stage was robbed, Franklin announced, dismounting, about 10 miles out. No one seriously hurt, but they scattered the passengers when they fled. There was a woman, Emmett said urgently. Penelope Abbott, from Boston. Franklin nodded. Young woman, brown hair, blue traveling dress. She's fine, Donovan showed more grit than some of the men. She's walking in with a couple other passengers, refused to wait for us to arrange transport. Relief washed over Emmett, followed quickly by admiration. Within 20 minutes, a small group of travelers appeared on the road into town. In the lead was a slender woman in a dusty blue dress, her chestnut hair escaping from what had likely been an elegant arrangement hours earlier. Emmett stepped forward, suddenly aware of his rough appearance and the 4 curious children crowding behind him. The woman stopped a few feet away, her clear gray eyes assessing him frankly. Mr. Donovan, she asked, her voice cultured but with an unexpected warmth. Miss Abbott, he confirmed, removing his hat. I apologize for your welcome to Montana. A smile transformed her face, revealing dimples that hadn't been visible in her photograph. I believe I was promised adventure, Mr. Donovan, though perhaps not quite so soon. Tommy pushed forward. Did you shoot at the bandits, madam? Tommy, Emmett admonished, but Penelope laughed a genuine, musical sound that seemed to ease the tension from the air. I did not, she told the boy, though I did consider hitting one with my traveling case when he attempted to take a locket that belonged to my grandmother. The children gazed at her with newfound awe. Emmett found himself similarly impressed. These are the children, he said, introducing each one. Henry, Thomas, Mary, and Sarah. Penelope knelt, despite her dusty dress, to greet each child at eye level. I'm very pleased to meet you all. I've heard so much about you from your father's letters. He's not really our pa, Tommy blurted. Our real parents died. A flash of pain crossed Emmett's face, but Penelope didn't miss a beat. Family isn't always about who shares your blood, she said gently. It's about who loves you enough to care for you every day. From what I can see, you have a real father in Mr. Donovan. Henry's serious eyes studied her, then he offered a small nod of approval. Emmett felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. You must be exhausted, he said. We should get you settled. The ceremony isn't until tomorrow, so you'll be staying with Mrs. Henderson tonight. Nonsense, Abigail Henderson interrupted. The poor girl's been through enough today. Reverend Graham is still in town. If you're both agreeable, we could have the ceremony this evening and she can go home with her family tonight. Emmett looked uncertainly at Penelope, unwilling to pressure her after such an ordeal. Miss Abbott should rest, and I would prefer not to delay, Penelope said firmly. If that suits you, Mr. Donovan. Their eyes met, and Emmett saw determination beneath her composed exterior. This woman had traveled across the country to marry a stranger and mother 4 orphaned children in the untamed West. She'd faced road agents on her first day in Montana territory. She wasn't one to be coddled. Then let's find Reverend Graham, he agreed. The ceremony took place an hour later in the small white church at the edge of town. Penelope had been given time to wash away the dust of her journey and change into a simple cream-colored dress that Abigail loaned her. The children stood in a solemn row beside Emmett, watching as this stranger became their mother with a few simple words and the exchange of plain gold bands. You may kiss your bride, Reverend Graham announced. Emmett hesitated, acutely aware that their first touch would be witnessed by half the town. Penelope solved his dilemma by rising onto her toes to place a gentle kiss upon his cheek. We'll have time, she whispered for his ears alone. The ride back to the ranch was filled with the children's excited chatter as they competed to tell Penelope about their home, their chores, and their favorite hiding spots. Emmett remained largely silent, watching his new wife interact with the children with increasing amazement. She answered each question thoughtfully, asked her own in return, and seemed genuinely interested in everything they had to say. As they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Emmett felt a moment of doubt. The house was solid but plain, the barn needed painting, and the yard was functional rather than beautiful. It was nothing like the refined Boston home Penelope had left behind. "There it is," Mary announced proudly, "our ranch." Penelope leaned forward, taking in the vista of the house nestled in the valley, backed by pine-covered mountains and surrounded by grazing land where Emmett's modest herd of cattle roamed. "It's beautiful," she said softly, and Emmett could hear the sincerity in her voice. The wagon pulled up to the house just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The children scrambled down, eager to show Penelope everything. Emmett moved to help her descend, offering his hand. It was the first time they had truly touched, and he was struck by the strength in her slender fingers as they gripped his. "Welcome home, Mrs. Donovan," he said, the name still strange on his tongue. Penelope looked up at him, her gray eyes reflecting the sunset. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan." "Emmett," he corrected. "I reckon a wife should call her husband by his given name." "Then you must call me Penelope," she replied with a small smile. "Or Penny, as my father did." "Penny," he repeated, liking the way it sounded. The moment was broken by Tommy racing back to them. "Come on. We want to show you your room." The evening passed in a whirlwind of activity. Penelope was given a tour of the house, served a hastily prepared supper, which she complimented despite Emmett's awareness of its shortcomings, and helped settle the excited children for bed. She read them a story from a book she had brought in her traveling case, her voice bringing the characters to life in a way that had even Henry enthralled. When the children were finally asleep, Emmett found Penelope standing on the porch, gazing at the star-filled sky. "It's so vast," she said without turning. "In Boston, the buildings and lights obscure much of the night sky. I've never seen stars like this." Emmett moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "It takes some getting used to the openness. Some find it frightening." "I find it exhilarating," she admitted, "though I imagine the novelty may wear off when winter comes." A comfortable silence fell between them. Emmett wrestled with what to say next. This woman was now his wife, yet she was still largely a stranger. "I've prepared the small bedroom at the end of the hall for you," he finally said. "I thought you might want, that is, until we know each other better." Penelope turned to face him, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. "That's very considerate, Emmett, thank you." He nodded, relieved she understood. "It's been a long day, you should rest." "Yes," she agreed, but made no move to go inside. Instead, she asked, "Will you tell me about them?" The children's parents, Emmett leaned against the porch railing, gathering his thoughts. "Jack and Elizabeth Wilson were the finest people I've ever known. Jack and I fought together in the war, came out here together afterward. He met Elizabeth in Denver, brought her back as his bride. I've never seen two people more suited to each other." "How did you come to raise their children?" Penelope asked gently. "Smallpox," Emmett said, the word still bitter on his tongue 2 years later. "Hit hard and fast. Jack asked me to care for them before he passed. There was never any question that I would." Penelope was quiet for a moment. "And you've never been married?" "No," Emmett admitted. "Came close once years ago, but she couldn't abide frontier life, went back east." "Yet you've chosen to bring another Eastern woman into your home," Penelope observed. "That seems a risk." Emmett turned to face her fully. "The children need a mother. I can teach them to ride and shoot, to tend cattle and mend fences, but there are things they should learn that I can't provide. Henry's becoming a man, Mary's growing into a young lady. They need guidance I'm ill-equipped to give." "And what of you, Emmett?" she asked quietly. "What do you need?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. "I need the children to be raised right," he answered after a moment. "To honor Jack and Elizabeth's memory by giving their children the life they would have wanted for them." Penelope nodded, accepting his answer, though something in her expression suggested she heard what he hadn't said. I should retire now. Tomorrow will be another full day, I imagine. Penny, Emmett called softly as she reached the door. I'm glad you're here. Her smile in response was small but genuine. So am I, Emmett. Good night. The first rays of dawn found Emmett already awake, moving quietly through his morning chores. He'd slept poorly, acutely aware of his new wife's presence down the hall. The reality of what he'd done, bringing a stranger into their lives, making her the children's mother through nothing more than correspondence, and a brief ceremony weighed heavily on him. He was feeding the horses when Henry joined him, taking up a pitchfork without being asked. What do you think of her? The boy asked after several minutes of companionable work. Emmett considered the question carefully. I think she's brave, coming all this way, facing those road agents without losing her composure. I think she's kind from how she spoke to each of you. Henry nodded thoughtfully. She's not what I expected. No, what did you expect? Someone fancier, I guess, more delicate. Henry shrugged. But I like her. She talks to us like we have brains. Emmett smiled, feeling some of his worry ease. Henry's approval meant something. The boy had taken on the role of protective older brother with fierce dedication after his parents' deaths. The sound of the house door opening drew their attention. Penelope stepped onto the porch, dressed in a simple blue skirt and white blouse, her hair neatly braided and wrapped around her head. She scanned the yard until she spotted them by the barn, then raised a hand in greeting. Breakfast is nearly ready, she called. Mary's helping me with the biscuits. Emmett and Henry exchanged surprised glances. Breakfast preparation had always been Emmett's responsibility, with the older children helping as they could. We'll be right in, Emmett called back, setting aside his pitchfork. As they walked toward the house, the smell of coffee and frying bacon greeted them. Inside, they found the kitchen transformed. The table was properly set. Tommy and Sarah were washing their hands without being reminded, and Mary was carefully arranging biscuits on a platter, her face flushed with pride. Good morning, Penelope greeted them. I hope you don't mind that we started breakfast. Mary was already awake and eager to help. I'm making real biscuits, Pa, Mary announced. Not just heating up the leftover ones like you do. Emmett felt a momentary sting at the implication that his efforts had been inadequate, but it was quickly replaced by gratitude at seeing Mary so animated. The girl had been the most withdrawn after her parents' deaths, rarely showing enthusiasm for anything. They smell wonderful, he told her sincerely. Breakfast was the most orderly meal the Donovan household had experienced in years. Penelope had a natural way of directing the children without seeming to give orders. Conversation flowed easily, with everyone taking turns to speak rather than talking over each other, as was their usual habit. I thought I might start setting up a proper schoolroom today, Penelope mentioned as they finished eating. Mr. Donovan mentioned in his letters that the children's education has been somewhat improvised. Emmett felt heat creep up his neck. We do our best. They read every evening, and I've taught them their figures. And you've done admirably, Penelope assured him quickly. But as a trained teacher, I can offer a more structured approach, perhaps in the small storage room off the main room. It seems to have good light. That was supposed to be Ma's sewing room, Sarah said quietly. Before she got sick, a heavy silence fell. Emmett watched Penelope closely, wondering how she would navigate this delicate territory. I see, Penelope said softly. Then perhaps that room should remain special. We could use a corner of the main room instead, with a bookshelf and a small table. Sarah seemed satisfied with this compromise, nodding her approval. After breakfast, Emmett took Penelope on a proper tour of the ranch, showing her the cattle grazing in the near pasture, the creek that provided their water, the small orchard that Elizabeth Wilson had started and that he'd maintained as best he could. You've built something remarkable here, Penelope commented as they walked back toward the house. The children are fortunate to have this place to grow up. It's Jack's legacy more than mine, Emmett admitted. I was always more comfortable with horses than cattle. Had a small horse trading business before I took on the children. Had to sell most of my stock to keep the ranch going. Penelope stopped walking, turning to face him. You gave up your own dreams for them. It wasn't a question, but Emmett answered anyway. They're worth it. Yes, they are, she agreed. But perhaps you don't have to sacrifice everything. The children mentioned you're excellent with horses. Could you not resume that work in some capacity? Emmett was surprised by her practical approach. Perhaps in time. There's a stallion I've kept Thunderhead. Planning to start breeding him once I have the resources to acquire a few good mares. I would like to see him, Penelope said with genuine interest. Emmett led her to a separate paddock where a magnificent black stallion stood watching them, his powerful presence commanding attention. He's beautiful, Penelope breathed, approaching the fence. Careful, Emmett warned. He's not overly fond of strangers. To his astonishment, the horse approached the fence, stretching his neck to investigate Penelope. She remained still, allowing him to sniff her hand before gently stroking his muzzle. You have a way with him, Emmett observed, impressed. Penelope smiled. My grandfather raised horses in Vermont. I spent summers there as a child. You never mentioned that in your letters. You never asked about my childhood, she replied simply. Our correspondence focused primarily on practical matters. Emmett realized she was right. Their letters had been respectful but formal, outlining expectations and responsibilities rather than sharing personal histories or dreams. I'd like to know more, he said. About your life before Montana. Penelope's expression softened. I'd like that too. The days began to establish a rhythm. Penelope proved herself capable and adaptable, quickly learning the routines of ranch life while introducing improvements that even Emmett had to acknowledge were beneficial. She established regular school hours for the children each morning, set up a reading corner in the main room, and organized the chaotic household with quiet efficiency. The children responded to her differently, each according to their nature. Sarah attached herself to Penelope immediately, following her everywhere and soaking up maternal attention like parched earth receiving rain. Mary was more cautious but drawn to Penelope's knowledge and patience. Tommy tested boundaries constantly, but even he responded to her firm, fair approach. Henry remained the most reserved, polite but watchful. Emmett found the boy sitting on the corral fence one afternoon, observing as Penelope hung laundry with Sarah's enthusiastic but not particularly helpful assistance. What's on your mind, son? Emmett asked, leaning against the fence beside him. Henry shrugged. Just thinking. About Mrs. Donovan. She's different than Ma, Henry said after a moment. Ma was always singing, always laughing. Mrs. Donovan is quieter, Emmett nodded. People show their feelings in different ways. Your mother wore her heart on her sleeve. Mrs. Donovan keeps hers more guarded, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. Henry considered this. Do you love her, Pa? The question caught Emmett off guard. I respect her greatly, he answered carefully. Care for her well-being, love. Love takes time to grow. But you married her, Henry persisted. I did, Emmett acknowledged, because you children need a mother and because I believed she would be a good one. So far, I've been proven right. Henry seemed unsatisfied with this answer but didn't press further. Emmett watched the boy's face, seeing too much understanding in eyes too young. Henry, he said gently, Mrs. Donovan isn't trying to replace your mother. No one could. She's here to help us all build a new kind of family. I know, Henry said, sliding down from the fence. I just don't want anyone to get hurt. As Henry walked away, Emmett wondered which anyone the boy was most concerned about. That evening, after the children were in bed, Emmett found Penelope at the kitchen table, mending one of Tommy's shirts. The lamplight caught the gold of her wedding band as her needle moved smoothly through the fabric. You've been good for them, he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee and sitting across from her. In just 2 weeks, I can see the difference. Penelope looked up, her face softening from concentration into a small smile. They're wonderful children, they make it easy. Now that's not true, Emmett chuckled. Tommy put a snake in your washing basket yesterday. A harmless garter snake, Penelope pointed out. And he did it to impress me, not frighten me. He wanted to show he was brave enough to handle it. Emmett was continually surprised by her insights into the children's behavior. How did you come to understand children so well, having none of your own? Penelope's hands stilled for a moment. I taught school for 8 years. You learn to read children when you spend your days with 30 of them. Why did you leave teaching to come here? It was a question he'd wondered about but had never directly asked in their correspondence. Penelope was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on her mending. My position at the school was becoming uncomfortable. The headmaster had developed unwelcome attentions toward me that were increasingly difficult to avoid. Emmett felt a surge of protective anger. He forced himself on you. No, she assured him quickly. Nothing so dramatic, but his persistence was wearing, and as he was my employer, my options were limited. When I saw your advertisement, it seemed providential. The honest vulnerability in her admission touched Emmett deeply. I'm sorry you were put in such a position. Don't be, she said, resuming her mending. It led me here, and despite the challenges, I find I'm quite content with that outcome. Their eyes met across the table, and Emmett felt something shift between them, a deepening of understanding, perhaps, or the first tentative roots of something that might eventually grow into love. The moment was broken by a clap of thunder that rattled the windows. Rain began to pound on the roof, and a small cry came from the girl's bedroom. That's Sarah, Emmett explained, rising. She's frightened of storms. May I? Penelope asked, setting aside her mending. Emmett nodded, watching as Penelope made her way to the bedroom. He could hear her gentle voice comforting Sarah, then the soft sounds of a lullaby he didn't recognize. He moved closer to the partially open door, watching as Penelope sat on the edge of Sarah's bed, stroking the girl's hair as she sang. Mary was awake too, watching from her own bed. My ma used to sing when it stormed, she said when Penelope finished. Did she? Penelope asked. What did she sing? Mary sang a few lines of O Shenandoah in a small, sweet voice. Penelope joined in, harmonizing softly until both girls' eyes began to droop. As she slipped out of the room, she found Emmett still in the hallway. The look on his face must have concerned her, for she asked, Was that all right? I didn't mean to overstep. No, Emmett said, his voice rough with emotion. No, it was perfect. You're doing everything right. Penelope's cheeks colored slightly at the praise. I'm trying. I want so much to be what they need. You are, he assured her, and before he could second-guess himself, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Good night, Penny. Her eyes widened slightly, but she smiled. Good night, Emmett. As spring turned to summer, the relationship between Emmett and Penelope continued to evolve in small, meaningful ways. They developed an easy partnership in running the household and caring for the children. Their conversations grew longer and more personal, often continuing late into the evening after the children were asleep. Emmett learned that Penelope was the daughter of a scholarly father who had encouraged her love of learning and a practical mother who had taught her household skills. She had lost both parents to influenza within months of each other when she was 22, leaving her to make her own way in the world. In turn, he shared stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his service in the war, and his friendship with Jack Wilson that had brought him west. They still maintained separate bedrooms, neither rushing what both sensed was a delicate progression toward a true marriage. Yet Emmett found himself increasingly aware of Penelope as a woman, the graceful way she moved, the sparkle in her gray eyes when she was amused, the softness of her hand when it occasionally brushed against his. The children noticed the growing warmth between them. One evening, as Emmett was helping Penelope clear the supper dishes, Tommy blurted, If you want to kiss Ma, Pa, we won't mind. The plate Penelope was holding clattered against the wash basin. Emmett felt heat crawl up his neck. Tommy, that's not appropriate dinner conversation. But Mr. Henderson kisses Mrs. Henderson all the time, Tommy persisted. And she's his wife, and Mrs. Donovan is your wife. So that's enough, Thomas, Emmett said firmly. Later, when the children were in bed, Penelope brought up the incident. He called me Ma, she said quietly as they sat on the porch enjoying the cool evening air. Does that bother you? Emmett asked. She shook her head. No, it touches me deeply actually. I don't want to presume to take Elizabeth's place. You aren't, Emmett assured her. You're creating your own place in their hearts, in all our hearts, he added softly. Penelope looked at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. Emmett, whatever she was about to say was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Emmett was immediately alert, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. Stay here, he instructed, moving to the edge of the porch. 3 riders appeared in the yard, their forms indistinct in the darkness. Emmett raised the rifle, not aiming but making its presence known. "That's far enough," he called. "State your business." "Emmett Donovan," a voice called back. "Marshal Franklin sent us. There's trouble." Emmett recognized the speaker as one of the deputy marshals from Pinecrest. He lowered the rifle slightly. "What kind of trouble?" "The Carson gang broke out of the territorial prison. They were spotted heading this way." Emmett felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The Carson gang, 3 brothers who had terrorized the Montana Territory for years before being captured. He'd been part of the posse that had brought them in 2 years ago, after they'd killed a rancher and his wife just 20 miles from here. "They've made threats against everyone involved in their capture," the deputy continued. "Marshals gathering men to patrol the area, asked if you join." Emmett glanced back at Penelope, who had risen and moved to stand behind him. Her face was pale in the moonlight, but her expression was composed. "When?" he asked, turning back to the deputy. "First light. Meeting at the crossroads." Emmett nodded. "I'll be there." After the deputies rode off, Penelope placed a hand on his arm. "The Carson gang, are they dangerous men?" "Yes," Emmett answered honestly, "but they won't get far. Too many people know to watch for them." "The children should stay home from their fishing trip tomorrow," Penelope said decisively. "Until these men are caught," Emmett agreed. "I'll explain it to them in the morning." That night, sleep eluded him. The thought of the Carson brothers roaming free, potentially seeking revenge, filled him with a cold dread he hadn't felt since the children's parents died. The responsibility of protecting not just the children now, but Penelope as well, weighed heavily. Shortly before dawn, he rose and dressed quietly. He was checking his rifle when a soft knock came at his door. Penelope stood in the hallway, already dressed, her hair braided for the day. "I've made coffee and breakfast," she said simply. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, the house still dark around them. Neither spoke much, but the silence was companionable rather than strained. As Emmett prepared to leave, Penelope handed him a package wrapped in cloth. "Food for the day," she explained. Then, with a forthrightness that had become characteristic of her, she added, "Please be careful, Emmett. We need you to come home safely." The simple statement and the genuine concern in her eyes touched him deeply. Acting on impulse, he drew her into an embrace. She stiffened momentarily in surprise, then relaxed against him, her arms circling his waist. "I'll be back by nightfall," he promised, then pressed a gentle kiss to her lips before releasing her. Her cheeks were flushed as she stepped back, but her eyes held a warmth that stayed with him as he rode away from the ranch. The day stretched long for Penelope, trying to keep 4 energetic children occupied within the confines of the house and yard, while maintaining a calm demeanor despite her worry. She organized lessons in the morning, baking in the afternoon, and stories in the early evening, all while keeping a watchful eye on the surrounding landscape. Henry, perceptive as always, noticed her tension. "Pa will be all right," he told her as they washed supper dishes together. "He's the best shot in the county." Penelope smiled at the boy's attempt to reassure her. "I'm sure he is, and I'm not worried, just being cautious." But as darkness fell with no sign of Emmett, her concern deepened. The children were reluctant to go to bed, clearly anxious themselves, but she finally convinced them that their father would want them to maintain their routines. Once they were settled, Penelope sat on the porch, a shotgun across her lap, one of the first things Emmett had taught her to use after her arrival. The night was quiet except for the usual chorus of insects and the occasional cry of a night bird. The sound of approaching hoofbeats just after midnight brought her to her feet, the shotgun ready. Relief flooded through her when she recognized Thunderhead's distinctive gait and Emmett's silhouette against the starlit sky. He dismounted wearily, leading the horse to the porch rather than the barn. "All clear," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. 2 of the Carsons were caught near the territorial line. The 3rd was shot trying to escape. Penelope set the shotgun aside and moved to him, taking the reins from his hand. "Let me tend to Thunderhead. You're exhausted." Emmett looked like he might argue, then nodded gratefully. The children, all asleep, they were worried but brave. While Emmett went into the house, Penelope led the stallion to the barn, removing his saddle and bridle with practiced movements she'd learned over the past months. She brushed him down, gave him fresh water and hay, then made her way back to the house. She found Emmett in the kitchen, slumped at the table with a cup of coffee in front of him. His face was drawn with exhaustion, a day's growth of beard darkening his jaw. "You should sleep," she said gently, moving to warm the meal she'd saved for him. "In a moment," he replied, watching her move about the kitchen. "The children behaved for you. They were perfect," she assured him, placing the plate before him. "Eat something first, then rest," Emmett obeyed, too tired to argue. When he'd finished, Penelope took his plate and gently urged him toward his bedroom. To her surprise, he caught her hand as they reached his door. "Thank you," he said simply, "for keeping them safe, for being here." Penelope felt a surge of emotion at the raw gratitude in his voice. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," she answered truthfully. His eyes searched hers for a long moment, then he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. Instead, Penelope met him halfway, their lips meeting in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. "Penny," Emmett whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she hadn't heard before. "Yes," she answered simply, understanding the unspoken question in his eyes. That night, husband and wife truly became one, finding in each other's arms a passion neither had expected when they'd entered their practical arrangement. Afterward, as Penelope lay with her head on Emmett's chest, listening to his heartbeat, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. "I never expected this," she confessed softly. "When I answered your advertisement, I hoped for security, for purpose, for a family to care for. I never imagined that you might find love," Emmett finished, his fingers gently stroking her hair. Penelope raised herself on one elbow to look into his face. "Is that what this is? Love?" Emmett's eyes, so often guarded, were open and vulnerable as he gazed up at her. "I believe it is." "I know I've never felt this way before." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "Nor have I." As summer turned to fall, the Donovan family settled into a new harmony. The children blossomed under the combined care of their parents, each finding their place in the evolving family dynamic. Henry began apprenticing more seriously with Emmett in the ranching and horse breeding aspects of their life. Mary discovered a talent for teaching younger children when Penelope allowed her to help with Sarah's lessons. Tommy's mischievous energy was channeled into productive activities, and Sarah's nightmares about the night her parents died gradually became less frequent. Penelope found herself growing more confident not just as a teacher and homemaker, but as a rancher's wife. She learned to ride proficiently, to help with the cattle when needed, and to handle the various emergencies that arose on a working ranch. The respect she earned from Emmett and the children only deepened the love that had blossomed so unexpectedly. In late September, as the aspens turned golden on the mountainsides, Penelope made a discovery that both thrilled and terrified her. She waited until the children were asleep to share it with Emmett as they sat before the fire. "I believe I'm with child," she said quietly, watching his face for his reaction. Emmett froze momentarily, then a slow smile spread across his features. "A baby," he breathed, reaching for her hand. "Are you certain?" "As certain as one can be without a doctor's confirmation," she nodded. "I've suspected for a few weeks now." Emmett moved to kneel before her chair, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A child of our own," he said wonderingly. "The children will be ecstatic." "Do you think so?" Penelope asked, voicing her deepest fear. "I worry they might feel replaced." Emmett shook his head firmly. "Not these children, they have too much love to give. They'll be the most devoted siblings a baby could ask for." Penelope relaxed, believing him. In the months she'd lived with them, she'd seen the depth of love the Donovan children were capable of. "We should tell them soon, then, before the town gossips beat us to it." The news was received exactly as Emmett had predicted. Mary and Sarah were beside themselves with excitement at the prospect of a baby to help care for. Tommy declared he would teach the baby to fish as soon as it was big enough. Henry, ever the thoughtful one, promised Penelope he would take on more responsibilities to ensure she didn't overwork herself. As winter settled over the Montana territory, blanketing the ranch in snow, the Donovan household turned inward, enjoying the quiet season of preparation. Emmett added a room to the house for the coming baby, working through the coldest days to ensure it would be ready in time. Penelope and the girls sewed and knitted baby clothes, while the boys helped Emmett with the winter chores of caring for the livestock and maintaining the ranch through the harsh weather. In the evenings, they gathered around the fire, reading, playing games, or simply talking. It was during these quiet times that Penelope felt most blessed, watching the faces of the children who had become hers in every way that mattered, feeling the child growing within her, meeting Emmett's eyes across the room and seeing in them the same contentment she felt. The baby arrived on a clear April morning in 1876, just as the first wildflowers were beginning to appear in the meadows around the ranch. After a night of labor, with only the midwife from town and Mary as helpers, Penelope gave birth to a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's chin. When Emmett was finally allowed into the room, his eyes filled with tears at the sight of his wife holding their son. "He's perfect," he whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Would you like to hold him?" Penelope asked, tired but radiant. As Emmett cradled his son for the first time, the door creaked open and 4 anxious faces peered in. Penelope smiled and beckoned them closer. "Come meet your brother," she invited. The children approached reverently, each taking a turn to examine the tiny new addition to their family. "What's his name?" Sarah asked, gently touching the baby's hand with one finger. Emmett and Penelope exchanged a look. They had discussed many possibilities, but had waited to make a final decision. "What do you think of the name Jack?" Emmett asked, watching the children's reactions carefully. Henry's eyes widened. "After our father, if that seems right to you all," Penelope said softly. "Your parents will always be a part of this family." Mary nodded solemnly. "Jack is a good name. Pa would be proud." "Jack it is then," Emmett confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "Jack Donovan." As spring turned to summer, baby Jack thrived, adored by his siblings and the center of the household's attention. The ranch prospered as well, with Emmett's horse breeding business finally beginning to yield results. Thunderhead's first foals were showing promise, attracting attention from buyers as far away as California. Penelope continued to teach the children, though her methods had become more flexible to accommodate ranch life and her responsibilities as a mother. She found unexpected joy in the balance she had struck between the intellectual pursuits she had always valued and the practical, physical life of the frontier. One evening in late summer, as Penelope sat on the porch nursing Jack and watching the sunset paint the mountains in spectacular colors, Emmett joined her, settling into the chair beside hers. "Penny," he said after a comfortable silence, "do you ever regret it? Answering my advertisement, coming all this way to marry a stranger?" Penelope looked up from their son's face to her husband's, seeing in his eyes the same love that had grown steadily between them over the past year. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. Emmett reached over to take her free hand in his. "When I placed that advertisement, I was looking for a mother for the children. I never expected to find a partner for myself, someone who would change my life so completely. We've both been fortunate," Penelope said softly. "To find love where we least expected it. More than fortunate," Emmett corrected. "Blessed." As they sat together in the gathering dusk, the sounds of the children's laughter drifted from inside the house where Henry was teaching the younger ones a card game. Baby Jack dozed contentedly in his mother's arms. The cattle lowed softly in the distant pasture, and somewhere an owl began its nightly hunting call. Penelope leaned her head against Emmett's shoulder, feeling a profound sense of rightness. This was home, not the elegant Boston house of her childhood, but this rugged ranch carved from the wilderness, with the family that had welcomed her and the husband who had captured her heart. "Do you know what today is?" Emmett asked suddenly. Penelope thought for a moment. "August 15th. Why?" "1 year ago today, you stepped off that stagecoach, dusty and defiant after facing down road agents," he reminded her with a smile. "You looked at me and these wild children of mine, and instead of turning right back around, you married me that very day." "The best decision I ever made," Penelope said, tilting her face up for his kiss. Later that night, with Jack settled in his cradle and the older children asleep in their beds, Emmett and Penelope stood at their bedroom window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "I have something for you," Emmett said, reaching into his pocket. "A proper anniversary gift." He placed a small wooden box in her hand. Opening it, Penelope found a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Inside was a tiny portrait of the children and baby Jack, painted by an artist who had passed through Pinecrest the previous month. "Emmett, it's beautiful," she breathed, touching the miniature faces with a gentle finger. "Not as beautiful as the family you've helped create," he said, fastening the chain around her neck. "When I lost Jack and Elizabeth, I thought my heart would never heal. Then these children became mine and I found purpose again, but something was still missing until you came." Penelope turned in his arms to face him. "And what was that, love?" he said simply. "The kind that makes a house a home, the kind that turns strangers into family, the kind I never thought I'd find again until a brave Boston schoolteacher stepped off a stagecoach and into our lives." As Emmett lowered his lips to hers, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that the journey that had brought her to this moment across thousands of miles, through fear and uncertainty, into the arms of a man she had agreed to marry sight unseen, had been leading her home all along. In the years that followed, the Donovan family would face many challenges: harsh winters, droughts, illness, and the ever-present hardships of frontier life. But they would face them together, drawing strength from the bonds that had been forged in that first year. Henry would grow to become Emmett's partner in the horse breeding business that eventually gained national recognition. Mary would follow in Penelope's footsteps to become a teacher at the growing Pinecrest School. Tommy would channel his adventurous spirit into exploration, eventually helping to map the still wild northern territories. Sarah would discover a talent for healing, studying with the town doctor to become his assistant. And Jack, the first of 3 children born to Emmett and Penelope, would grow up knowing the story of how his mother had traveled across a continent to find a family she didn't know she was looking for, and how his father had opened his heart to love again when he least expected it. The mail-order bride from Boston and the Montana rancher who had advertised for a mother for his orphaned children had found something neither had dared to hope for: a love that transformed them both, and a family bound together not by blood alone, but by choice, by commitment, and by hearts that had found their true home on the wild frontier.